Hello, fellow educators. Welcome to the Classroom Behavior Solutions podcast, the podcast that gives you weekly scientifically grounded and evidence-based solutions to your behavior dilemmas, providing a blueprint to developing flexible behavior solutions that really work for your individual pupils, classes, or even whole school environments. If you're a teacher, a Senko, or even a school leader with a passion for supporting pupil behavior in a way that is positive and effective, this podcast is for you. My name is Adam Dean, and I'm your host. Hi everybody, welcome to episode 2 of Classroom Behavior Solutions. This week we're going to talk about reinforcement and, I'm going to whisper this word because it's a bit of a dirty word, punishment. Reinforcement and punishment, what are they and how do they work? And also I'm going to talk a little bit about punishment and actually why I'm not a fan of punishment. So they're two fairly simple but quite misunderstood topics, and we're going to talk about them in terms of behavior analysis, the science of behavior. Think of them. We're going to look at some examples of each. We're going to unpick where people sometimes go wrong when they're applying them or think they're applying them. So the reason we're covering this is, have you ever come up with a great reward system, something that you think is going to be amazing for your class or your pupil, and then it doesn't work? It has zero positive effect. You come up with this beautiful sticker chart, and little Johnny, by the way, I call all pupils in this little Johnny. So if you do teach a pupil called little Johnny, I apologize. I'm not talking about them. Or have you ever thought of putting in place something that you thought would 100% stop the behavior? We're going to start keeping them in at lunch, or we're going to use an isolation room or something like that. That will stop it, and it doesn't. It has the complete opposite effect. And if that does happen, then it's usually due to one of two things: A, not knowing the actual motivation behind the behavior, and B, not really understanding reinforcement or punishment. So let's talk about those two things in a bit more detail now. So what is reinforcement? So reinforcement is anything that happens after behavior that's going to make the behavior happen more in the future. It's that simple. Okay. Positive and negative reinforcement both make behavior happen more in the future. We're not going to cover positive and negative right now, but we might cover it in a later episode. But we're just talking about reinforcement right now. And punishment is the opposite of that. Quite simply, punishment is anything that makes that happens after a behavior that's going to make it happen less in the future. Now, remember, it's not, in this context, we're not talking about nice things and bad things. Reinforcement isn't necessarily a nice thing, and punishment isn't necessarily a horrible thing. These are just things that make behavior go up or make behavior go down. So you'll notice I didn't say anything along the lines of reinforcement is something that you hope will make behavior go up, or punishment is something that you hope will make behavior go down. And that's because reinforcement and punishment work by definition. So you can't say reinforcement doesn't work, because if reinforcement isn't working, if you're doing something that's reinforcing, that you think is reinforcement, and behavior is not increasing, then what you're doing isn't reinforcement. It might be something that you think is nice. It might even be something that you pupil or your class think is nice. But if it doesn't work, it's not reinforcement. So, for example, you put a lovely sticker chart up and the good behavior doesn't increase. Well, then the sticker chart isn't acting as reinforcement. Or you chuck in a load of praise for the good behavior, and actually you notice good behavior going down. Or in the case of something that you think is going to be punishment, you keep a child in at play, or you put them in detention and the behavior doesn't go down, it actually goes up. So these are some great examples of people thinking that what they're doing is one thing and actually it's neither, or sometimes the complete opposite. And we will talk about that more in later episodes. But let's give an example. So this is a story. I tell little stories every now and then. Little Johnny's in a maths lesson. He's given his maths, okay? He tries to do the maths. He finds the maths really difficult. The teacher praises little Johnny and gives him a sticker for trying hard. Because little Johnny, he's giving it a go. He's giving it a go, and he doesn't always give it a go. And teacher says, Well done. That's brilliant. Have a sticker for trying hard. Now, little Johnny is actually really embarrassed by this attention that he's just got from the teacher. Internally, he's thinking, maybe not even consciously thinking, he's like, oh, now she's just singled me out as trying hard, and actually I can't do it. And at the same time as feeling really embarrassed, he's also still finding the work really, really difficult. Feels alone, and he doesn't feel like he can do the work. And he doesn't at this point have the confidence or the skills to ask the teacher for help or to ask the teacher not to praise him. So here's what little Johnny does. He throws his pencil and rips up his paper. Teacher shouts at Johnny. She gives him a timeout, which in turn delays him having to do the work, and she keeps him in at play. And actually, it's raining outside. Little Johnny doesn't like the rain. And teacher doesn't know this. He's being bullied at playtimes. So he's now avoided that as well. And the teacher helps him to complete the work in private, which is what he wanted. And he's not being embarrassed in front of his peers. So if we look at that from two different viewpoints, from Johnny's point of view, we've just looked at that. But from teacher's point of view, Johnny's doing his work. She does a nice thing, or he does a nice thing and says, well done. And then suddenly, Johnny throws a load of stuff all over the place. And then it doesn't make any sense. So in this situation, obviously it does actually make sense. In this situation, the teacher's praise was punishment. The teacher's praise was punishment. She thought it was reinforcement. He thought it was reinforcement, but actually it was punishment because it made that doing work behavior go down. The timeout was potentially reinforcement because it meant that he avoided the work briefly, and missing break was double reinforcement. So that was meant to be a punishment because actually now little Johnny's getting help with his work and he's avoiding that break time, the rain and the bullies. So you can see how unless we really understand what punishment and reinforcement is and look at the results of what we're doing, we don't know whether what we're doing is actually punishment or reinforcement. Quick note about punishment. Not a fan of it. Not a fan of punishment at all. And bear in mind, punishment includes things like timeout. It includes things like detention, isolation rooms, missing breaks and lunches, taking points away. It actually includes traffic lights. If we're moving people down onto red and things like that, that, or what we think is punishment. Those are all things that we think are going to be punishment, including verbal chastisement. That's the classic, what we think of as punishment. And there's a couple of reasons I'm not a fan. I'm going to tell you why now. The first is that often for adults, it's sometimes a knee-jerk reaction, and it's not conducive to learning. Sometimes there's an attitude of, sure, nobody listening to this podcast is like this, but sometimes there's an attitude of, I'm the adult, you're the child, you're going to do as I say. And actually, children, pupils, they're human beings with their own internal worlds. And, that's not how the world works. It's not me, child, you adult, you do as I say. And actually, that's not the type of thing we want to be teaching our children, that they need to do what adults tell them for all sorts of different reasons, including some pretty good safeguarding reasons, as you can imagine. So anyway, that's one of the reasons. But now I'm going to give you several really good reasons you should do everything you can to avoid punishment or avoid what you think is punishment and try to use reinforcement. And don't worry, in later episodes, we're going to give you a lot of tools around how to use reinforcement and how to know if what you're doing is reinforcement. So don't worry about that. Reasons not to use punishment. First one, half the time, what you think is punishment is actually reinforcement of some kind. So we're going to tell them off, send them out. They're going to get attention from their peers. They're going to avoid certain environments. Maybe they're going to think it's funny. All of those things. So you think it's punishment. It's actually reinforcement. It's going to make the situation worse. Second, punishment comes with negative emotions, negative emotive reactions. And it is actually going to damage the relationship with the teacher or with the adults and the pupil. and it's, that support, that relationship is going to go down. Think about the last time you were punished or chastised, like as an adult, even if it was, I don't know, by a traffic warden or something like that. Did it make you want to do more good stuff for the person who chastised you? And I think it highly unlikely. So it damages that relationship. Even if it works, and even if it is punishment, it only reduces unwanted behavior. It doesn't increase a positive behavior. So if you shout at little Johnny because he's talking in class, maybe it stops him talking, but it doesn't keep him start putting his hand up or doing more work. Detention for swearing at best is going to reduce swearing. At absolute best, probably not, but let's say it does, it's going to reduce swearing, but it's not going to increase politeness. Chastisement for chatting, it might stop chatting, but it's not going to increase working. And also, here's a bonus reason I don't like punishment. Even when it does work, it's usually temporary. And the behavior will come back. But in different ways. People just do the behavior more covertly. So, you tell a child off or a group of pupils off for chatting, then you just start passing notes. That's certainly what I did when I was at school. And actually, just to go back to that negative emotions and that relationship thing as well, punishment is going to negatively affect the self-esteem of that person. Yeah, any form of punishment is just, confirming an idea about that person that they've already got in their head. So, I don't like it, obviously. Older people would often say, and I still get this now, older people often say, "Oh, I didn't do that in my day because I would have." A certain age person will go, "Oh, I wouldn't have behaved like that in my day because I would have got the cane, or I would have got the slipper, or I da." But here's the thing. That's a load of old rubbish, because the fact that people still did things despite the cane and the slipper and all of these things that people think of as punishment means that those things didn't work, did they? Otherwise, people wouldn't have done them at all. And actually, we have, in terms of society, we have prison as punishment for doing crimes. And in some parts of the world, we still have the electric chair and punishments like that. People still do those behaviors. They still do the things that lead to those, what people think of as punishment. So punishment is really very ineffective as a way of supporting behavior. I've talked a lot about punishment today, and that's because you'll probably not hear me talk about it hardly at all after today, because we're going to be talking a lot about reinforcement. Okay, so what have we talked about today? We talked about reinforcement, and we discussed that reinforcement was something that happened after behavior that made the behavior more likely to happen. And we said that reinforcement works by definition. If you're doing something and it doesn't make behavior go up, it's not reinforcement. No reason to ever say reinforcement doesn't work for that child. It's just a case of we haven't found reinforcement for that child. We've talked about punishment, and I've talked in quite a lot of detail about why I don't like punishment and why I would ask you to avoid it at all costs and to always work with reinforcement. That's it this week. So hopefully that's been useful. Next week, we're going to talk about the effortfulness of behavior. I hope you join us. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Classroom Behavior Solutions podcast. To make sure you don't miss future episodes, click the subscribe button and share this podcast with others. The more people that listen, the more help I can provide. To learn more and to find our social media pages, visit www.classroombehaviorsolutions.com. See you next time on the Classroom Behavior Solutions podcast. Thank you.